Welcome to our webinar today on active listening for leadership engagement, which is going to be presented by one of our awesome instructors, Justin Yaassoub. This is presented by MacEwan University School of Continuing Education, and at the end we're going to tell you about some of our courses that have to do with this topic, but we still want you to take away some learning for today. This session is being recorded, so if anybody has to pop out or if you want to share the presentation with anybody later on, within the next couple business days, you will get a link to the recording. We can also take questions. We will probably answer most of them at the end, but if you have any questions in the meantime, you can pop them into the chat or the Q&A functions. Could you go to the land acknowledgement for me, please, Justin? So while our webinars, they may have people from all over the country. I don't know where everybody is from, but we here at MacEwan are located in Edmonton, Alberta, which is on Treaty 6 territory. So I'm just going to read our land acknowledgement before we begin today. So we acknowledge that the land on which we gather in Treaty 6 territory is the traditional gathering place for many Indigenous people. We honor and respect the history, languages, ceremonies, and culture of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who call this territory home. The First Peoples' connection to the land teaches us about our inherent responsibility to protect and respect Mother Earth. With this acknowledgement, we honor the ancestors and children who have been buried here, missing and murdered Indigenous women and men, and the process of ongoing collective healing for all human beings. We are reminded that we are all treaty people and of the responsibility we have to one another. And with that, I am going to pass it off to Justin with our little agenda and to introduce himself. Take it away, Justin.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for joining us today on around this awesome leadership topic. First, just some housekeeping notes. You know, it's internet and the potential of being disconnected is real. So if that happens, I just ask you to be patient and I'll work my hardest to get back on and carry on with the session. If you have any questions, I believe you're able to type them up and I'll answer them at the end of the session. We should only be about 30 to 40 minutes through just me talking to you, and then the rest we could have some engagement and some questions. So today we're gonna just talk about what is listening, and listening as a skill. So at least you could walk away from this webinar with a few things that will help you be a better listener or a more engaged listener. And then we want to also take it beyond communication, which is beyond listening, and what we could actually achieve from that skill that we kind of train to around listening. And then, of course, like I said earlier, at the end, we'll be doing some questions. Just quickly, a little bit about me. I love working at MacEwan and mostly facilitating a lot of the leadership courses around the foundations of leadership and strategic planning. We also do engage teams, and we'll talk a little bit more about the whole certificate after, but I also have a consulting company called All Around Consulting, where we focus on frontline leadership. In addition to that, it's a company that prides itself in creating high performers and increasing engagement in our workforces. You're more than welcome to talk to me about that as well. And my leadership background comes most of it or strongly from the special forces community. And we try to use a lot of these attributes that we kind of learned and gained in small teams to share with the rest of the world. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started about listening and let you know that we are not very good at it, including myself. So this is a very, very important point to say that listening is not easy. It's difficult to maintain the discipline of listening to others. But what I like to say is that we just have to consciously know when we are listening and when we're not listening. And if we consciously know when we're not listening, we start training ourselves to be better listeners. So statistically, we spend 60% of our time listening, but we actually only retain 25% of it. And the references are there on the graph there. But of course, that doesn't apply to me or to you or you in this session or this webinar. You're going to definitely take away way more than 25%, right? But immediately after a session or a talk, the average person loses a third of what they just learned. no matter how careful they actually thought they were listening. But listening isn't just about retention, and there's more to it than that. And today, I think what we want to discuss is listening in our listening to people, listening to connect. And it's not listening to kind of take in information, but it's listening to enhance the engagement or connection with the people that are around us. So and with that, some people are better listeners than others, and you often have we have some people that are able to remember. For example, I met somebody, or I spoke to somebody yesterday that said they're great at their superpower is memory, and and I kind of countered them on that and said your superpower is probably active listening and listening to kind of understand and comprehend, and bless that person. I honor that and respect that tremendously. We all know leaders that just remember names and birthdays and everything about the people that they're leading, and we always want to be them in a way, because we could see the connection that forms when you're walking in a hall and you say hello to somebody with their name that you haven't seen in 6 months or 7 months or only interacted once, right with. So it's quite the skill. But what we're here to do is actually try to take some sort of information that will help us to be better listeners. So I just want to talk a little bit more about why we're losing our listening, and the foundation behind it, so we could understand how we could improve our listening. And it's not today. It didn't start today, and it didn't start with the millennials or Generation Z or D or E or whatever group you want to whatever label you want to throw on whatever group. It's existed for a long time. Actually, it started when we started recording. When we start and recording as in writing. As soon as the skill of writing kind of grew, the skill of listening went down, and the skill of memory. So even in classrooms today, and when I was going through university, why listen when you could record? And so we record the lecture, and then of course we don't go back to listen to it. You have the option to record now, and it's kind of an excuse to not listen. It's an excuse to not really pay attention. So it's important to understand these tools that are also allowing us to kind of use recording as an excuse to not listen. So the world is also just a very, very loud place. It's hard to get our attention without screaming. Headlines are extreme, and they're filled with shock, surprise. They're bold. The bold use of language just to get our attention, and it just keeps getting more and more and more, louder and louder and louder. And you probably see that in advertisements, and you see that on social media where certain news articles are trying to catch your attention, or maybe even fake ones, and all that good stuff that's trying to steal our attention. But the other piece of that I want to note is that because the world is so loud and there's so many messages around, we're failing to listen to the subtle messages. And sometimes it's the subtle messages that matter the most. Not listening to a person saying less, not listening to a person drifting away, not listening to to yourself, to care more about you and others. So by having all these loud messages around, we're actually not focusing on those small things that matter the most. And it's not actually words, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, but it's like those micro expressions, the microfacial expressions, the individual that is a bit disengaged, and all that kind of stuff. So the louder you are, the more you're getting listened to now, and the people that aren't loud are being neglected. And if you're being neglected, you're disengaged, and if you're disengaged, we have a problem. So this is kind of the piece I wanted to just note first, to let you know that we're losing our listening, and part of it is not in our control. Society is kind of throwing all these messages at us, but we do need to regain control if we want to regain engagement within our people, within our staff, within our children, within our society. So what I like to say is we need to balance the equation on a leadership level, and in our organization. When we talk about communication, often we're focused on the words, the delivery, the tone, the pause, and our ability to actually speak to others or write an epic email. But communication is not just words. There's a lot more to it than that. And there's a big part of it, which is listening. And you just said, we spend 60% of our time listening. However, we don't focus on that skill. And if we look at performance evaluations at our work, when asked to be better communicators, leaders and those they lead assume that it's focused on verbal or written communication. So we work hard on spending money on improving our ability to be concise, be brief, be specific, write more clearly, be grammatically more correct. We even get coaching on being better speaker in reference to tone. And we even sometimes work on the body language piece, eye contact, using hand gestures, use more body language to kind of draw people in, all that good stuff. But we always keep missing a big part of the communication equation, which is that listening component. And when you ask our organizations and our leaders to be better communicators, they often quickly focus on the verbal side of it. So what about listening? Communication is really complex, and it's a complex skill, and there's a lot involved in it on the verbal side and the nonverbal side. And interesting enough, the other thing that's kind of working against us being awesome listeners is that we don't get rewarded for it often. Yet we often only reward the verbal side of things. Charisma comes from your ability to project your voice, and charisma comes on inspiring people through a speech, right? Often, you go out and you have this awesome keynote, or you speak well, and people just give you praise for it. We don't get much praise for listening, and I've changed that in my own life, where if someone is listening to me, or I see that they're practicing these skills around active listening, I reward them for it. I say thank you for that. Right. And I say thank you. And you can notice that through eye contact and body posture and what they're saying and how often they're saying quiet. So, and that's the easiest way to reward listening. Because funny enough, we usually criticize the person that comes to our meeting that doesn't say much. And that just because they didn't say much, it doesn't mean they were disengaged or not engaged. So it's important to start seeing those subtle messages that don't actually come across verbally. They come across with a nonverbal tone. So with that, what is listening? I mean, after all, that's why we're here, right? What is listening? And I wish this was a little bit more, we could create more engagement here where I could ask some of you to tell me what you think listening is, but I don't think the mics are on your end, so I'll be the only one speaking. Forcing you to listen in this case, I guess, but please throw questions down as you see, as the slides kind of go through here. So when it comes to listening, what is it? And at its simplest, like the most simple way to kind of speak to it is that listening is simply stated, it makes meaning from sound. That's what listening is. We listen to make meaning from sound, just like you're doing right now. However, there are filters and barriers that prevent or enhance our ability to make meaning from sound. And when we look at listening, we'll talk a little bit more about sound and listening. But I want to share with you some of these filters, just so you know that what prevents you from being that active listener or the best listener that you can be. And that actually all starts with, well, first and foremost, someone like me, I have a hearing impairment. So that is one barrier, a physical barrier to being able to be an active listener and listening well. But other things are cultural values, different beliefs, perspectives, language, right? Experiences, even how you woke up in the morning or what happened on the drive to work. Those are actually, our barriers to our ability to listen to the people around us. Also, a big one is emotional language. There's phrases that generate emotion, and as a result, it inhibits understanding. So the use of extreme language, and I'm working hard to reduce that after, and it is difficult, but using words like you always or never or must forever, right? Well, you're always doing that, right? As soon as you say that, it triggers different things. So it's a barrier to our listening. And we as soon as we get that emotional trigger, we kind of stop listening in a way, and we start drifting and all that kind of stuff. So it's important to understand these barriers, because that's when I was talking about being a conscious listener. You just know that, oh, that was a barrier for me. I stopped listening, or I got triggered, and you go back to the conversation, right? And the other piece about barriers is that when we come historically, or potentially you know growing up, or depending where your role is, or especially as a leader in an organization, or when you become a parent, you feel like people come to you not to listen, not for you to listen, but to give advice, to fix a problem. And that can be farther from the truth. You know, often we go to people that actually listen to us. Our best, if you look at, you know, who your best friend is, or when you're kind of upset or mad, or you want to talk about something to somebody, it's usually that friend that actually listens, right? And what we want to be, we all want to be that friend that listens, because when we start listening, we start shifting towards that engagement conversation. So what is listening? Simply stated, it is making meaning from sound. But that's not why we're here. We want to go beyond that, right? We want to go beyond the speed of sound. And before I get there, I want to give you another barrier that is really, really important. It's called intra-personal communication. And intra-personal communication is when you're talking to yourself. So as soon as I said beyond the speed of sound, you may have drifted, right? You may have drifted. You're like, oh, speed of sound, what is that? What is that? Is that Mach like 3? Oh yeah, Top Gun. I was just watching Top Gun the other day. Those planes went really quick. Oh, that was a good movie. I should watch the first Top Gun. And that's what happens. That's you talking to yourself, right? And it's called intrapersonal communication, and it happens all the time. It probably happened already with me saying one thing, or you coming here and be like, oh, that's not what I wanted to hear from this active listening thing, and your mind just drifted away. We all drift, but the goal here is to bring us back to the present. And the best way to do it is tell yourself to stop talking to yourself. You can be a little bit more harsh with yourself if you want, but the goal here is just to remind yourself to go back to listening. So stop thinking about Top Gun and just come back to the conversation. So beyond the speed of sound is actually engagement. And this is these are the skills I kind of want you to take away to make you a better listener, which will allow you to create more engagement in the world that you live in and in the world that you work in. So 4 of them. And these are, just to kind of be clear, this comes from our Foundations 2 leadership, Foundations 2 course from the leadership certificate. So I'm going to quickly talk about each one of these for you to be able to kind of just take back and see how that would work in your day-to-day. And some of you might already know some of these, some might not. So, but they are honestly, for me at least, have changed the way I interact with others, with my spouse, and the youth that we work with. And it just, overall, it allows you just to be a better a better human that's able to connect with other people and create that sense of belonging with others simply by listening. So here are the 4 skills. The first one is reflecting. And when someone comes to speak to you, especially if you're in a leadership role, or you have direct reports, or even if it's as a friend or as a parent, it's important to reflect. And reflecting is actually just playing back or repeating the same information to the sender that they have just given back to you. I know it sounds weird, but that's all it is. And as much as possible, you keep the same words, but remove any negative or derogatory comments. So if someone's pretty upset and they come up to you and say, I am so upset that my boss, and maybe they have a swear word in front of it, or potentially just a negative or derogatory word, my whatever boss keeps giving me more work than anyone else in the unit, right? We don't judge whether that's true or not. We don't say, well, at least they're giving you work. or we don't say, well, are you sure they're giving you work, or how much work are they giving you? We simply reflect. And using that same definition, we're just going to repeat the same information or same words that they said to us. So, so your boss is giving you a lot of work lately, and the conversation just keeps going on. I just said that, but they're not gonna. They are just going to say yeah and carry on with whatever they want to tell you. It's just a form of reflecting to show that you're truly listening, right? The other one is validating. Validating is demonstrating you value and respect the information the sender is giving you. And you have nothing to say about that, by the way. Like when you're just validating, whether it's right or wrong is not what you need to do. So I'll give you a quick example here. I have worked here for 10 years. So my opinion and knowledge should be worth something, right? Well, you could then obviously sometimes you're quick to say, well, only if you're actually competent, right? Or you won't say that to a friend, but sometimes we question that. We right away we're like, well, maybe you're 10 years, but you stayed on the front line the whole time, so it doesn't matter, or you never even got a promotion, so who cares? But we don't do that. We just validate. And the way to validate that is, when they say I've worked here for 10 years, so my opinion and knowledge should be worth something, we're just validating that point. So yeah, with that experience, you should be listened to. Because really, it is true, 10 years of being somewhere, you should have some sort of experience, right? So we just validate that. And that works especially around emotions, you could have somebody like, oh man, what that person said the other day really, really upset me, really made me angry, right? Well, that's an emotion and they're allowed to feel that. So we just have to validate it. We're not here to say whether it's right or wrong. We're just here to validate it. And, we use all these skills together to get to a conclusion here, but we simply we give them a check mark that they're allowed to feel this way. It's important to let people feel what they feel, right? So the next point is empathy, and we all know a lot about empathy and its importance in leadership and its importance in connecting and engaging with people. Empathy is that critical skill, and it demonstrates sensitivity to another's emotions and understanding on some level how it feels to be in their shoes, right? How it feels to be in their shoes, not what it feels like for you to be in their shoes. This is very important about empathy that kind of changed my perspective on it. So it's not, and I'll give you a quick example around that. Usually, I'm kind of a guy that leads from the front. If I was to ask somebody to do something, I want to practice it or do it first. If we're going to have to do a hike up a mountain, I'm hiking that mountain for the reason that, to say that I did it, you can do it. But that's not the case anymore, right? I need to know what it feels like to be in that person's shoes. So that person could be going through a divorce. That person could have been driving to the mountain to hike it, and they had a minor collision. So their worries all about their vehicle, or on the way there, they had a phone call from their partner and they ended their relationship. So that's what it means to be in their shoes. Just to remember that, right? We have to be in their shoes. So understand their whole, not just the fact that you did this task or whatever it may be. So an example of that would be, I'm so exhausted and so overloaded with work that I have no life outside of the workplace. To be empathetic, well, usually when someone says that to you, like, oh, just take some time off. Don't you have time off? Don't you have some vacation time? Or stop working so much. So right away, we're trying to fix the problem, right? But what we just need to do is reflect, validate, or show some empathy towards it. In this case, if we want to show some empathy, we could use an emotion, or we could align them to the emotion itself, right? So you could just say, oh, you must be exhausted, right? So we're showing empathy, or, oh, that could be very, very exhausting, or that could be very draining. That's it. Now we connected with them. Some people like to use the word, oh, I know how that feels. That works too. Or some people like to bring it back to themselves and to show empathy. Oh, you know what? I totally understand what you're saying. That was me last week, right? So that sometimes I don't like to go that route, because then you're making a comparison and you want to keep it about the individual speaking and not so much about you. So empathy is critical here, and to connect and to just allow people to do that. And on the emotional piece around children, especially, sometimes they don't know what feeling to feel. And part of empathy is just aligning them with that. So they could come to you and be like, oh, I'm so angry to John, about John, he took all my toys or something like that. Or we could go a little bit, teenage years, they could be angry with a friend in reference to not liking their Facebook post or something like that. And we could actually align their emotion back to a real emotion, or not the real emotion, but a different one. It's not, is it anger or is it frustration, right? Is it anger or do you feel lonely, right? Is it anger or is there a guilt? So as a leader or as a parent, you need to, it's really important for you to understand all the emotions that kind of take place and align people to those emotions, because that way they're not just either angry or happy or sad, right? There's more to it than that. So sometimes we could be frustrated, and if we're frustrated, it's not as bad as being angry, right? So help people identify the emotion and how they feel. And the last one is summarizing. The word "so" is so powerful, and all it is so what you're saying is, and repeat some of the stuff the individual has told you. Everything that we just talked about here in all these skills around reflecting, validating, empathy, and summarizing, none of them told us to fix anything. None of them told us to actually give a solution to a problem. And this is the part where I kind of have some people have a tough time with. It's like, well, why would they come to my office if they don't want me to fix the problem? Well, that's just an assumption that we're making as leaders, that our people are coming to us to actually have us solve their problem, where in reality they just want to be heard. So I challenge you to practice that, to just hear your partner out, right? Let them be frustrated or vent out, and just use these 4 tools and skills to see what happens, right? And of course, don't just practice it once, but God, it didn't work. I encourage you and challenge you to use it a few times. So with that, to go back to listening, listening is a skill. So it must be practiced like every other skill. It's a discipline, just like leadership. And it has to be practiced as often as possible. So I have 3 images here, and none of them have words on them, and none of them, there's no interpersonal communication there. There's a bit of, arguably you could even say there's no intrapersonal communication. But to listen actively, we actually don't need words. We could practice it or become better without it. And that it's just savoring sound, understanding what it is to just listen. I have a dryer and washer there, because when you're doing laundry, maybe pause for a minute and listen to the dryer. Is there a theme there? Is there a beat? Is there a tone? Is there something? Is it like, is it, can you create it? Can you create something out of it? Can you create a song out of it? I'm not sure, but the power of listening is actually should be practiced as often as possible. Or listening to your body. There's no words there, right? Listening to your body, there isn't a lot of words to take in. This weekend, I was out camping, and in the spirit of this discussion, I wanted to practice a little bit more listening. And my partner and I chose not to have any music that day, and we just wanted to listen. And it was a whole different experience. We go to the same spot all the time, and it was just very interesting for me to hear all the sounds, and that actually sound is more than just sound. For certain animals, it's time and space. The sound happens to get another sound and another sound that, for some animals, it situates you in the location that you want to be in. Sound is so powerful for different species, and I got to experience a little bit of that. And even just being silent in our area there, we had way more squirrels approach us, right? And even birds sounded a lot closer. And it was just interesting, right? It was just it was fun to just, even for the both of us, we didn't actually speak a lot. We just wanted to listen to ourselves and listen to those mundane sounds. So I challenge you to listen to the mundane sounds out there, whether it's a bus, whether it's traffic, whether it's your body, and then that will definitely help you out a little bit in practicing to listen to other people and what you're listening to. So with that, I want to let you know that connection is actually silent. Often we want to connect to people or with people by speaking with them. But a lot of the conversation that happens, it's really silent. And what I mean by that, it is emotion, right? It is energy. And that's how we kind of get the connection. When we listen actively, we tend to kind of get that subtle information from the people around us. And when we come to really understand people, it isn't the words that they say, it is the energy that they're actually letting off. It is the emotion that they're trying to communicate. And like I said, we're part of what we're experiencing now is that because we're so busy and everything's so loud, that we aren't actually listening to those subtle sounds, or not even sounds, but subtle energies and emotions that are really going to create engagement and belonging. And to go back to what's going on in society today, to move communication beyond just communication to engagement and belonging, is we have to shift towards that active listening, to listen to the new generation coming into our workforce, to listen to the new individuals coming to our workforce, and see what's really truly bothering them, or really what they want, right? Because we're just too busy speaking to them and telling them how to do a job, and telling them how to do this and how to dress and how to move and how to do that and that, but we're spending no time listening to them. And we kind of sense this big level of disengagement among our people, and often we blame them for it, right? We're quick to say millennials are disengaged or Gen Z is disengaged, but who really is disengaged, and where are we getting that level of disengagement? So here I challenge myself and the leaders in the room, because disengagement is a leadership problem in our companies, and we need to take ownership over that. Not here to preach, but it's important to recognize that. And is it starting at home? And because it's starting at home, are we motivating our people to take it, or our children to take it into the workplace? And what can we do to do that? What could we do to change that, to create a better and more engaged workforce? Because a world where we don't listen to one another at all is actually a very, very scary place. And not listening has become a leadership problem. And we don't listen to the call, we don't, even a societal problem, I would say, because we don't even listen to the calls of inequality. We don't listen to the screams of injustice, and we don't listen to the pains of our friends. We just kind of throw solutions at those problems without really truly listening. And we sometimes just look instead of listen. It's all visual, looking at signs and are the influencers on Instagram and other social media pieces. And I find this quote very interesting, reading it today, by Martin Luther King, which I assume a lot of you have heard before. In the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. But today, it seems like we're all silent, because if no one is listening, are we not just might as well be silent? And we're not because we're not saying, I say everyone is silent, not because we're not saying anything, but it's because we're not saying the right things. And we're not saying the right things because we're not listening empathetically and actively to truly say the right things. So as leaders, we really have to start listening a little bit more to be able to say the right things. And I started something with my young brother-in-law, who's 17, and he's very frustrated and disengaged, and you could see the frustration and anger in his face, and confusion and loss, and everyone's telling him what to do. And I made a promise that I would call him, and when I call him, I say, "Hey, how's it going today?" And he says, "Okay, I called to listen to you." And I'm starting to use that with a few other friends as well. And it's awkward, right, to say, "Hey," because usually what do we say? I called to talk to you, right? So I challenge you to call someone today, and instead of saying, "I called to talk to you," say, "I called to listen to you." And you set the condition that you're there to listen. You set the condition that you're here to listen to that person and your people. So I want to say to you, thank you for listening to me today. And thank you for inspiring me to be a better listener by sitting in front of you to talk a little bit about listening. And no one is good or bad at listening. I don't like to look at it that way. I just like to look at it as a journey to be the best possible listener that you can be. So what that means is that, consciously, we just need to be able to understand and recognize when we are listening and when we're not. So with that, I'll conclude it. I'll turn it back to MacEwan, and we'll take any questions.